The Silent Warrior, the untold story of America's most decorated soldier. December 30, 1968, northeastern Cambodia. The helicopter blades cut through thick jungle air. 37 men, one missing soldier, enemy territory that didn't officially exist. Staff Sergeant Robert Howard crouched in the Huey as it descended toward the landing zone in northeastern Cambodia. The mission was called Bright Light, a rescue operation for Private First Class Robert Sheridan, separated from his reconnaissance team somewhere in the green hell below. The jungle canopy swallowed sound, then it erupted. Gunfire tore through the morning mist, a landmine detonated underfoot, the world turned white then red. Howard would later recall in a Library of Congress interview, "My hands were all blown up and burned, and I couldn't stand up." Through the smoke and screaming, he saw his platoon leader lying exposed. Lieutenant Gerson, 6'4", 200 pounds, bleeding out in the open. Howard couldn't walk, couldn't hold a weapon, but he could crawl. What happened next would earn him America's highest military honor, his third nomination in 13 months. But here's what most Americans never knew. Robert Howard was the most decorated soldier to serve in the Vietnam War, yet few of his countrymen had ever heard his name. This is the story of the Silent Warrior, the man nominated 3 times for the Medal of Honor, the soldier wounded 14 times who kept going back, the boy from Alabama who became a legend that history almost forgot. Opelika, Alabama, 1939. Robert Lewis Howard was born July 11, 1939 in Opelika, Alabama to Charles and Martha Howard, the American South. Cotton fields stretching to horizons, a place where military service wasn't just duty, it was inheritance. His father was drafted into World War II when Robert was very young. One of his uncles served as well, both paratroopers in the famed 101st Airborne Division. Tragically, 2 of his uncles were killed in combat, while his father and the other 2 died soon after the war ended from their wounds. His mother took a job at a textile mill in Opelika to support the family. Young Robert and his sister were raised largely by their grandmother. She read them the Bible every day, taught them never to harbor hate. He remembered making cookies, saving syrup cans to pack them in, sending care packages to soldiers fighting overseas. To help put food on the table, Howard and his sister picked cotton at a very young age, learning the value of hard work and a sense of humility. He was always polite and gracious, tipping his hat to females. The boy watched convoys roll down the highway. Opelika sat just 28 miles from Fort Benning, Georgia, soldiers in uniform, jump wings gleaming. The 101st Airborne patch, the Screaming Eagles, the same unit his father wore. He became a star football player in high school. He received a full athletic scholarship. College beckoned, a way out, a different future. But service called louder than comfort. On July 20, 1956, 17-year-old Robert Howard enlisted in the Army, just 1 month after graduating high school. He wanted to wear the same wings his father did. The making of a Green Beret. For 10 years, Howard climbed the ranks. Infantry, Airborne, the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. He even earned an associate degree in business administration from the University of Maryland while serving. Then came July 1965. Parts of the 101st deployed to Vietnam by ship. Howard remembered the 17-day voyage with salt water showers. You'd get in the shower and the soap wouldn't lather. They had about 4,000 of us on a 2,000-troop transport, and you had to eat standing up with the ship rolling. I was eager to go to war to get off that ship. The landing was botched. The craft let them off prematurely in deep water. Welcome to Vietnam. For months, he served with the 1327 Airborne Infantry, firefights, ambushes, the brutal arithmetic of jungle combat. Then 1966, he was wounded, evacuated to a hospital. But something happened during his recovery, something that would change everything. While recovering, he bonded with fellow patients who belonged to the 5th Special Forces Group. There and then, he made a life-changing decision to become one of them. Green Berets, the quiet professionals, the men who disappeared into places that didn't exist on maps. At Fort Bragg, Howard underwent 23 weeks of intensive special operations training and became a reconnaissance team leader. Early 1967, he returned to Vietnam wearing the green beret and flash of the 5th Special Forces Group, but his assignment wasn't like the others. He joined MACVSOG Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, the highly classified unit that ran covert operations behind enemy lines. Cross-border missions into Laos and Cambodia, places American soldiers officially weren't. A fellow soldier who served with Howard in 1968 at Command and Control Central later wrote, "Robert L. Howard was a 30-year-old sergeant first class and the most physically fit man on our compound. Broad-chested, solid as a lumberjack and mentally tough, he cut an imposing presence." The missions were simple in concept, impossible in execution. Small teams, maybe 6 Americans, handful of indigenous fighters inserted deep into enemy-controlled territory, reconnaissance, raids, disrupting the Ho Chi Minh Trail supply network that snaked through neutral countries. Take all of John Wayne's films, throw in Clint Eastwood's too, and these fictions could not measure up to the real Bob Howard, the soldier wrote. The legend was about to be written in blood and fire. The first nomination, November 16, 1967, southeastern Laos. Howard led a covert SOG platoon-sized mission into southeastern Laos on November 16, 1967. Intelligence reported a large enemy weapons and rice cache. A recon team had the site under surveillance. Howard's Hatchet Force, a mixed unit of Americans and South Vietnamese, would insert and destroy it. Several helicopters were damaged by enemy fire, but Howard's team managed to land and link up with the recon team. Then the jungle exploded. North Vietnamese Army regulars, hundreds of them, machine gun nests, coordinated fire. His team found themselves pinned down by heavy machine gun fire. A sniper had them locked down. Howard eliminated the sniper single-handedly, then charged the machine gun position point-blank, killing all occupants. But war doesn't pause for heroism. A second machine gun opened fire. Howard crawled forward through the maelstrom and threw a hand grenade through the narrow opening, temporarily disabling it, but North Vietnamese troops scrambled back to the weapon and began firing again. Standing fully exposed as bullets sang around him, Howard retrieved a light anti-tank weapon and sent a rocket streaking into the bunker. The explosion shook the hillside. They extracted successfully. Mission accomplished, men saved. Howard was recommended for the Medal of Honor. But there was a problem, a political problem, an impossible problem. The encounter had occurred in Laos, and the U.S. was a co-signatory of the 1962 International Agreement on the Neutrality of Laos. Officially, no American combat forces operated in Laos. The mission never happened. The Medal of Honor nomination was downgraded to a Silver Star due to classification concerns. Awarding the nation's highest honor would require a public citation revealing where the action took place, exposing operations that were officially non-existent. Howard received his medal in a quiet ceremony, no headlines, no ticker tape. The war wasn't done with him, not even close. The second nomination, November 19, 1968, Laos. 1 year later, another mission into Laos. Howard accompanied a forward operating Base 2 Hatchet platoon. On November 19, 1968, they were ambushed by North Vietnamese forces supported by a Soviet-built PT-76 tank. A tank in the jungle, the earth-shaking roar of its cannon. Braving intense fire, Howard crept forward and knocked out the PT-76 with an anti-tank rocket. But the enemy wasn't finished. Hundreds of NVA soldiers surrounded the small American force. The radio crackled, a medevac helicopter was inbound. The helicopter approached and the enemy peppered its olive skin with dozens of holes. It began to slip sideways, yawing as the pilot fought for control. It lumbered a few seconds more and crashed in flames about 300 yards away. Already wounded, Howard ran through enemy fire to the burning helicopter and led the 2 surviving pilots and injured door gunner to safety, fighting another 300 yards through NVA fire to get them all back to his lines. Still not enough. He was hit again. 14 pieces of shrapnel tore into his body. Enraged, he charged the enemy position, killed 2 soldiers and dragged back a third as a prisoner. Extraction helicopters tried to land. North Vietnamese anti-aircraft guns drove them away. Night fell. The wounded Americans held their position in the darkness. Dawn broke. Another extraction attempt. Howard charged forward and silenced a 37 anti-aircraft gun that had been devastating the rescue helicopters, finally allowing the extraction to be completed. Again, recommended for the Medal of Honor. Again, the mission occurred in Laos, a country where America wasn't fighting. The nomination was downgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross due to the covert nature of the operations. 2 Medal of Honor actions, 2 downgrades, both for the same reason: political secrecy outweighed individual valor. The last time someone received a second Medal of Honor was in World War I, and it's unlikely we'll ever see another 2-time recipient in our lifetime. But Howard kept volunteering for missions, kept going back into the places that didn't exist. The mission that changed everything, December 30, 1968, Cambodia. 1 month later, another country that officially had no American combat operations. A 40-man bright light rescue mission launched into northeastern Cambodia, searching for Private First Class Robert Sheridan, separated from another SOG reconnaissance team. Howard was second in command. The helicopters descended through morning mist. The platoon had just left its helicopter landing zone and was moving out on its mission when it was attacked by an estimated 2-company force, 300 to 400 enemy soldiers. Initial engagement: grenade explosion. Howard was wounded and his weapon was destroyed by a grenade blast. As he led his men up a hill, he and Lieutenant Jim Gerson were wounded by a landmine. While administering first aid to Gerson, a bullet struck one of the wounded man's ammunition pouches, detonating several magazines. The explosion blew Howard backward. Flames, smoke, the metallic taste of blood. He came to in agony, temporarily blinded, his hands shredded by shrapnel. Although unable to walk and weaponless, Howard unhesitatingly crawled through a hail of fire to retrieve his wounded leader. Gerson was massive, 6'4", 200 pounds, dead weight. Howard dragged him inch by inch, bullets kicking up dirt, men screaming, the smell of burning flesh. An NVA soldier with a flamethrower was incinerating wounded Americans. Howard momentarily sought cover, then realized he must rejoin the platoon, which had been disorganized by the enemy attack. He began dragging the seriously wounded officer toward the platoon area again. Through his outstanding example of indomitable courage and bravery, Howard was able to rally the platoon into an organized defense force. For the next 3.5 hours he crawled from position to position, administered first aid, gave encouragement, directed fire on the encircling enemy. His hands were mangled, but he kept moving. Howard located 3 strobe lights and assembled them in a triangle around their position, got on the radio, and called in an airstrike on his own position. Hopping incoming aircraft could avoid hitting the friendlies inside the strobes. The ground shook, fire and thunder fell from the sky, so close the heat seared their faces. The incoming air power was so intense the fire from the assault struck close to his feet. But it worked. The enemy assault faltered. Then helicopter blades, the Air Force coming through impossible odds. Supporting aircraft successfully repulsed enemy attacks, and finally conditions allowed the landing of rescue helicopters. Howard personally supervised the loading of his men and did not leave the bullet-swept landing zone until all were aboard safely. Of the 37 troops who went into the landing zone that day, only 6 walked out. Howard was the last man on the helicopter. This time there would be no downgrade. No political considerations could erase what he'd done. But even then, bureaucracy moved slowly. The medal: March 2, 1971, the White House. President Richard M. Nixon presented Robert Howard with the Medal of Honor on March 2, 1971, during a ceremony at the White House. He was the only soldier to have been nominated 3 times for the Medal of Honor during the Vietnam War. 3 separate actions, 3 individual displays of valor that met the nation's highest standard. But here's the bitter truth. Perhaps no man represented the quandary of the political and moral dilemma of the Vietnam War in the heart and mind of America better than Howard. He had become arguably the most highly decorated serviceman in American military history, yet few of his countrymen even knew who he was. Unlike Alvin York or Audie Murphy before him, Howard was not touted as a national hero by the media. He was given no ticker tape parade and no Hollywood movie was made depicting his extraordinary exploits. The war had become too controversial. Heroes became complications, valor became politically inconvenient. But the decorations tell a different story, a staggering story. 1 Medal of Honor, 8 Purple Hearts, though he was actually wounded 14 times over 54 months of combat. Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, 4 Bronze Stars. NBC News said Howard may have been the most highly decorated American soldier of the modern era. The soldier who kept going. In December 1969, then Master Sergeant Robert Howard was commissioned to First Lieutenant, a direct appointment recognizing his extraordinary service. He could have stopped, could have retired, taken a safe assignment. Instead, he stayed in 36 years total. He received a bachelor's degree from Texas Christian University in 1973 before earning 2 master's degrees from Central Michigan University in the early 1980s. He served as company commander with the 2nd Ranger Battalion at Fort Lewis, Washington. From 1977 to 1978, he served as Mountain Ranger training instructor. He graduated from the National War College, class of 1980-71988. He retired from the U.S. Army in 1992 as a full colonel after 36 years of service. But even retirement couldn't keep him from serving. For 14 years after retirement, he worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs. He often spoke with students and troops about the importance of service and the fight for freedom. He spent much of his free time working with veterans until the time of his death. He also took periodic trips to Iraq to visit active duty troops even in his 60s, returning to war zones, encouraging a new generation. The men who served under him never forgot. One junior NCO recalled meeting Captain Howard at the 2nd Ranger Battalion in 1974. I remember walking across the battalion quadrangle with my friend, and before we knew it, Captain Howard and Lieutenant Bargewell were walking towards us. Capt. Howard was very unpredictable and we were on edge. Howard could just say, "Let's go on a run," could be 1 mile or 25, no telling. Howard had the ability to instill and project a level of leadership that can only be experienced. You would follow him anywhere. I have never met anyone in my life since then that exuded this energy of leadership. You felt honored in his presence and would be terrified to disappoint him. The final mission, December 23, 2009. Robert Howard died of pancreatic cancer on December 23, 2009 at a hospital in Waco, Texas. He was 70 years old. He was survived by 4 children: Denisha Howard, Melissa Jench, Roslyn Howard, and Sergeant Robert L. Howard Jr., and 5 grandchildren. On February 22, 2010, one of America's most decorated soldiers was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery. The mayor of Opelika, who attended the funeral, remembered. His service was at the chapel at Fort Myer. Snow was on the ground. They had a riderless horse. There was more brass there, 2 and 3-star generals. You know, he had 8 Purple Hearts, and I remember before he died him saying that most of them were for just flesh wounds. Can you believe that? He was a warrior. He was a warrior. I was so honored to be there to represent the people of Opelika. After his death, a bridge passing over Interstate 85 at Exit 58 near Auburn was named the Colonel Robert L. Howard Bridge. The 5th Special Forces Group headquarters building at Fort Campbell was named Howard Hall. At the dedication ceremony, Howard's daughter Melissa reportedly stated, "I know what my father would want me to say today. He would ask that when you walk by this building, do not think of him but of what he embodied, a true soldier, a soldier who always put God and his country above all else." The silent legacy. Of course, none of the lack of recognition bothered the quiet, unassuming Howard. He remained in the Army and served with distinction. He never sought glory, never demanded recognition, never wrote a memoir or cashed in on Hollywood fame. He was raised by a grandmother who read him the Bible and taught him never to harbor hate in his heart. He picked cotton as a boy, he tipped his hat to women, he followed his father's footsteps into the Airborne. And when his country called, when men were dying in places that didn't exist on maps in a war that half the nation opposed, he went back, again and again and again. 3 times nominated for the Medal of Honor, the only soldier in American history to achieve that distinction. 14 times wounded, 54 months in combat, 5 tour in Vietnam. Most highly decorated soldier of America's longest war. Yet walk down any American street and ask passersby, who was Robert Howard? Most will have no answer. Cambodia, December 30, 1968, revisited. Picture that landing zone again, the morning mist, the explosion, the moment when everything went white. A man with mangled hands, unable to walk, crawling through machine gun fire to save his platoon leader. A man calling airstrikes on his own position. A man who refused to leave until every single survivor was on that helicopter. Of 37 men who went in, only 6 walked out. Robert Howard was the last to board. That's not just courage, that's something deeper, something that transcends decoration and ceremony and political convenience. It's the answer to a question America has always struggled with. What do we owe those who fight in unpopular wars? How do we honor sacrifice when we question the cause? Robert Howard never asked those questions. He saw men in danger, he went to get them. 3 times he earned America's highest honor, twice it was taken away for reasons of secrecy and politics. Once, finally, it was given. But here's the truth that echoes across the decades: the medal didn't make Robert Howard a hero. Robert Howard was always a hero. The medal just made it official. Epilogue: The Lessons of a Silent Warrior. In an age of instant fame and manufactured celebrity, Robert Howard's story feels almost alien. Here was a man who accomplished the nearly impossible not once but 3 times and asked for nothing in return. He could have leveraged his status, could have become a spokesman, a politician, a media figure. The most decorated soldier of America's most controversial war could have written his own ticket. Instead, he spent his retirement working with veterans, visiting troops in Iraq, teaching young soldiers about duty and service. His grandmother taught him never to harbor hate in his heart. That lesson, learned in a poor Alabama home while packing cookies for soldiers overseas, guided him through the worst combat of the 20th century. He killed enemy soldiers, hundreds probably, but he never hated them. He fought to save the men beside him. That was always the mission, that was always enough. In the end, perhaps that's why his story matters more now than ever. In a time when every action demands recognition, when every achievement requires validation, when sacrifice must be broadcast and filmed and monetized, Robert Howard reminds us of something we've nearly forgotten. Some things are worth doing even if nobody's watching. Some sacrifices don't need applause. Some heroes don't need headlines. They just need to be remembered. Robert Louis Howard. Born July 11, 1939, Opelika, Alabama. Died December 23, 2009, Waco, Texas. Buried Arlington National Cemetery. Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, 4 Bronze Stars, 8 Purple Hearts. The most decorated soldier of the Vietnam War. The only soldier nominated 3 times for the Medal of Honor. The man history almost forgot. The Silent Warrior. Remember his name.